Hey guys, I'm Fowler. Today we're going to check out my Monstercat release Busted Out, and I'm going to show you how I made it. If you're into music production, I hope that this might give you some insight into how I do things and maybe give you some ideas for your own production. If you're just maybe thinking about getting into music production, I hope that this shows that it's not terribly complicated to get started and be creative with the tools that we have these days. So let's go. Here we are. I'm in my poorly green screened corner of the screen. And on the screen, we have Busted Out. Now, this project came about when Monstercat reached out to me about a Rocket League pack that they were putting together of Cyberpunk style music. I hadn't really done a whole lot of Cyberpunk kind of influence stuff up until this point, but I loved the style, so I said yes. And it came together really quick. I mean, if we look at the project info, 17 and a half hours, that's like, for me, that's a pretty quick project. Usually I pick away at stuff and mix and master and tweak and produce 24 hours, kind of almost like a minimum. But sometimes I'm very inspired, and I think there was also a tight deadline, so this track came together a lot quicker. Okay, let's jump right into it. So I guess the first thing we could talk about is the vocal, which is right here. Now this vocal, if I bring it over, make unique, if you see this pop up a lot, Cyberpunk, that's what I called the project to begin with. So, whoops. Okay, so let's send this just to the master channel. Let's not change anything. This is the raw recording.
Quit busting. No, wrong words. Okay.
So it's obviously off to a strong start. I said the wrong words.
Quit running your mouth. You better bust it out. Quit running your mouth. You better bust it out. Quit running your mouth. You better bust it out.
So I believe it was it was this last one that was used. But I didn't do it to any sort of BPM or anything. I just I set it really slow so I could get that kind of that rhythm really tight, and then I could speed it up, which is what we hear. So that's time stretched and affected, obviously. So let's take a look at the effects that are on it. Leading up until right before the drop here, where we get the full phrase, it's low pass. So let's just jump over here and take a look at, boom, here's the mixer. First thing is this. I use this a lot. In fact, I use this on almost all the vocals. I just find the compressor on it works. It's really easy to use. It's easy to get good results. So you see, it's not crazy compressed, but it's enough to be able to feed the distortion and stuff consistent level, a consistent amplitude. So we get the same kind of overdrive or distortion, not depending on the volume or whatever. That was super clear, and I'm sure you understood all of that. So it goes through Little Altar Boy. So it's kind of funny. I mean, like, I pitched it up, and then I'm using Little Altar Boy to pitch it back down. Actually, let's turn that off. So that's providing the lower octave. Just a high pass filter. Absolutely pegging this decapitator distortion. Just some de-essing to kind of pull, because you can imagine those S's get real harsh after they go through a distortion. Very subtle room sound. And the rest of the stuff is this is just the low pass filter. Oh, no, it isn't actually. Another high pass, because why not? Let's see. Okay. So this is the low pass filter that's opening up, and it's also gaining gain as we get closer to the drop. Okay, so those are the vocals. I mean, I don't even know how I came up with them, to be honest. I think I was just like, what would I say to like, I think what it was I was putting myself in like the position of like a Rocket League player or just somebody who is about to be challenged or somebody who was being challenged by somebody else, like in Rocket League, for example. And I was thinking, okay, like they're running their mouth, they're like telling me how good they are, how they're going to kick my ass or whatever. And then I basically, okay, well, if you think you're so good, let's see it. And that was just, I mean, it's not a overly complex concept. It's just basically like shut up and put your money where your mouth is sort of thing. Anyway, let's move on. Those are the vocals. Okay, these are kind of the main Cyberpunk synths. Let me solo these guys. Okay, so first off, we've got a serum. Oh my god, crazy, eh? So this serum is basically just a detuned kind of sawtooth plucky thing, going through a bandpass filter and a little bit of chorus just to give it some width. The big thing with this one is it's velocity sensitive. So I can see I have my velocity mapped to the cutoff. I also have this envelope mapped to the cutoff. So this envelope's always going to cause the cutoff to move down to give it that phrasing, the bow kind of thing. But now I can use the velocity of the notes in the piano roll to control where in the cutoff it is. And you can see, yes. So now you can kind of create new phrases based on the velocity. Put it back to where it was. Okay, so that's creating the da 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 da. Now there's another layer here. This one is a Juno clone. Let's just solo that one actually. Real simple. I'm using the square wave with a set pulse width that's kind of narrow, a sawtooth, a sub oscillator, which is a square wave that's an octave down. And the big thing is the noise. The noise going into the resonant filter, it really lets you hear where that peak in the filter is. So if we turn the noise off, and then we turn it back on, kind of gives it that zappy sound, right? It's the noise has a broader spectrum of frequencies in it. In fact, it, technically is the whole spectrum. So as that resonant peak is moving up and down, or in this case, just down, it's providing that resonant peak with all of the energy it needs to be present. And if that doesn't make sense, I totally understand. But basically, that noise is just allowing the resonant sweep to be more present, which is exactly what I just said. Cool. All right, moving on. Now this one is another Juno layer, and I think this one is, yeah. This one is kind of a boring synth, but what it's doing is it's just adding like girth. It's just adding like bottom end. It's not the sub bass, but it's kind of that like meaty kind of connective tissue between the sub bass that we haven't gotten to and the higher up basses, the kind of character basses, I would maybe call them. So it's just a plucky sawtooth and sub. I mean, there's a little bit of resonance, a little bit of chorus to give it some width again. It's getting mildly decapitated. I don't really know how you get mildly decapitated, but that's what it's doing. And then let's see. Okay, let's get there. This guy, we've already gone over that guy. Oh, the macro. So as we're building up to the drop, this macro is controlling the cutoff. So obviously we're just opening the filter up, pretty typical kind of build up. Okay, so those are those bases. I think there's 2 more layers that come in during this build. So let's take a listen to those. Oh, sidechain. Okay, so this, my creatively titled patches, there's a quick little snippet there. I'm sure you'll probably find some interesting ones if you freeze the frame. So this synth is kind of interesting in that it uses, I loaded in a single cycle sine wave at the note C4 into, you can actually add in audio waveforms to be loaded into the noise oscillator, which gives you yet another wavetable. So you can actually use 3 wavetables in Serum. And it's kind of like a hack, kind of. But the cool thing is if you load the waveform into the noise oscillator, you can then use it as a modulation source. So like I'm actually modulating a few things, the warp, the cutoff, and the wavetable position. I'm modulating that with an audio frequency waveform, which you wouldn't be able to do unless you loaded it into the noise. So I've created this sine wave at note C4. I've loaded it into the noise oscillator just by putting it in. There's a folder with all your Serum patches and waveforms. I've put it in there. And then I've selected it as a modulation source for, I think, the biggest effect it's having is the cutoff. So I'm basically FMing this cutoff knob. I'm moving the cutoff knob up and down at an audible frequency. This is what it sounds like without it. So, I mean, it's a pretty powerful tool, and I think I've only ever used it this one time. But now that I have reminded myself that it exists, maybe I'll use it more. So that is basically most of the sound is coming from this sine wave modulating the warp and the wavetable position noise, A warp and B wavetable. So it's been, you can see the waveform trying to display itself at the audio rate, but it's too quick for the screen, so it just looks kind of like shaky. Same with this. So there you go. There's a really cool technique that I don't think gets used a whole lot in Serum because, again, it's kind of a hack, but it's definitely worth checking out. So that's kind of like the real grungy bass that's coming up during the build. Now this one needs... This is the other real grungy bass. This is a pluck that I made called Girthy AF. And it is, I mean, it's nothing crazy, really, now that I'm looking at it. Let's see how much the effects have to do with it. I'm going to turn the effects off. Definitely crunching it down a bit. It's an FM synth. It's got this is the main audio is coming from this sine wave, which is being FM'd from this a sound that I made in Massive years ago that crops up all the time in my music. You can probably hear it in, I'm not going to say every song, but almost every song I make. I like sneak it in one way or another. It's like that sound. So I loaded it in as a waveform, and we are using that to modulate the FM on this sine wave, going through some distortion, the OTT that's included, and then, well, this filter isn't even being used. I think I determined that just pushed it too far with that filter on. And it's going through a wave shaper to get crunched even more. Another OTT, not surprising. This limiter with a 0 attack because it was too clicky, I think. It's hard to hear the difference, but I think it was just hitting the master limiter a little bit too hard with those tiny little transients. So I used that limiter to just lop those off. And you can kind of get away with a lot of, when the bass is already this distorted and already this rough sounding, you can get away with a lot of like abuse to the waveform. Like you wouldn't normally want the limiter to be doing this sort of thing. It's kind of acting almost like distortion in this setting. If this was down to 0, it literally is just, or well, it's just distortion at that point, right? There's no time variant. So anyway, that's those are the main kind of cyberpunk, I think, synths. Let's find out. Oh, in terms of the bass, we still got the melody to cover. So let's maybe check those things out. Wow, massive. There's something about the pulse width modulation in massive that I don't know if it's like the best sounding, but I always go back to it because back in like 2015, 2016, I was making a lot of chiptune inspired stuff, and I would always use massive for that style of sound. So this is a massive synth. I'm just using LFO number 5 to modulate the pulse width on both of these, which are just a little detuned from each other. Let's see what this layer is. Oh, this is SQ8L. I always call it sequel, but like that's not what it's called. So anyway, I call it sequel. It's based off of like an old Rompler kind of synth, I believe. It's almost like a old school wavetable synth from, I believe, the 80s. Anyway, it's just kind of like a cheesy, brassy sound to layer in with it. Okay, so the resonant sweep is in the massive. Let's hear just the brass thing. Okay, so now these guys are, let's turn off the effects. Okay, so before I turn off the effects, we have to talk about the guitar. There's a guitar just playing the same notes. Wait, why isn't it making noises? Okay, so that's just me playing on my my Strat, just playing the melody along. I'm imagining this is probably 3 octaves of the same thing. Oh wait, let's. So that's the bottom octave. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That was just to give it that, to cut through a bit more and give it that kind of 80s sound where they would use octave pedals and stuff. So when you add all those together, this is the melody for the track. This is kind of the main melody behind the track. It's going through some reverb, a high pass filter as always. This is an interesting free plugin that I use quite a bit. This is a wow and flutter. So this kind of gives it that like unstable drifting vinyl kind of wobbly sound. If I turn this level up, you'll hear it a lot more. So I just added a little bit of that to kind of give it that retro feel, I guess. Let's see what this is. So this guy, this was just to add that, like, I'm like, well, where do I go from here? I got to build it up, and I've already added 10 octaves, so I had to add the 11th octave, which is what this one was. So if you add them all together, Let's get them all added up with all the automation. Okay, before we move on, let's check this out. I think this is kind of like it's like a riser, but all it is like a choir patch from this M1 emulation. Playing kind of a chord that's evolving and the low pass is opening up. Bust it out. And it comes back here later on as well. Okay, so we've covered the bass, we've covered the melody. Let's talk about, and the vocals, let's talk about the drums real quick. Wherever they, oh wait, what's this guy? We didn't cover this one. Okay, this is more effects. And these are kind of risers that I just made. Super detuned sawtooth with a LFO that's causing the pitch to go back and forth, kind of gives it a menacing kind of tone. I think, okay, so this is kind of cool. There's basically two of the same synth. One of them is going up in pitch and the other one is staying. And that's the riser. Okay, let's talk about drums. Let's find some drums to talk about. Oh, it's a shaker. Let's find like. Here's a super time stretched crash cymbal that gives it that kind of digital noise or digital sound. Not a whole lot of drums in the start. Oh, okay. Is it like a? That's like an amazing sounding 80s snare. Classic little, you know, reverse that snare into itself to kind of lead into it every other time. Okay, what else is happening? I think there might be a kick here. So a few kind of 80s loops that I've cut up and rearranged to give it that pattern. Okay, an 808 that I forgot that I put in there. Here's an interesting thing. Okay, so this 808 has this huge transient at the start, and I didn't really want that, so I just cut it off with this wave shaper. I said, nah, you're not going to go above this level. If I turn that off, yeah, let's solo it. It's kind of hard to hear, but that peak really messes with the master limiter, especially when you got kicks happening at the same time. All these peaks added together are like this massive peak at the end of the chain. Okay, so that gets us to the kind of build section. Some top loops. Here's the kick. This is also the side chaining. Some of you may recognize this from my previous videos. I typically will always do side chaining with a volume envelope, and then I assign all of the faders. I guess probably over there or over there. I can't remember where you see it on your screen, but if you see the mixer, you'll see the volume faders moving up and down. I basically assign all of the volume faders of all the tracks that I want to be sidechained. I assign it to this one clip, automation clip. And that way I can just I can shape it exactly how I want to shape it instead of trying to twist knobs in a compressor to try and get it to do what I want. I can just tell it exactly what I want it to do by drawing in the shape. Okay, here's some more probably 80s. There's a sample-based riser layered with my synth riser. Here's some shakers. So with this shaker, I think it was a little too loose sounding, so this volume envelope is actually just giving it more of a defined instead of like a so that's why that's there. Okay, and now we're finally to the drop. Let's look at the drop. First of all, we got pretty typical kick snare sort of thing. We got the sub bass coming in. Let's listen to the sub bass here. Oh, where's the sidechain? So this is a patch that I've made a long time ago that I use. It's basically a overdriven sine wave with a very, very short. The pitch starts up quite high and drops right down, almost like an 808, but so quick that it just sounds like I can. And that just gives it a bit of attack. Where it normally would just maybe be it's not very dynamic. It's just kind of a sine wave that comes on and off. This gives it a more of like a initial sound to give it more impact. All right, let's. So a lot of this drop is made up of these. I spend a lot of time just making messed up sounds and storing them in folders. So like, okay, that's the low pass. Like these are all sounds that I've just I don't like using other people's bass sounds because I think that takes away a lot of the fun and you end up sounding like other people that are using those same sounds. I want my music to be my music, so I create bass patches, I experiment with sounds, and if I find something that sounds cool, I try to figure out what key it's in. Maybe it has a tempo, maybe it doesn't, and I organize it in this folder, depending on what kind of sound it is. You know, these are a bunch of bass sounds that I've made, and I try to name them in a way that describes what they sound like. So there's a hit and then it goes blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so this is basically me just chopping up all of these sounds that I've made over the past. In fact, let's turn off the sub. And let's turn on all these sounds and we'll kind of go through them. There's still some synths as well, like not sampled, like MIDI, but I think the majority of this drop, is just sounds that I've made in the past sequenced in a way that creates a phrase. So, and they're all going through they're all going through a bus which has this low pass on it. Now, the other good thing about putting all of your wubs through a bus is you can distort them together, which means they'll interact with each other a little bit more. You can compress them together, which means that you can control the dynamics. You might have one wub that just peaks really loud and then other ones aren't as loud, so you can kind of squish them all together and make them sound cohesive. Especially, I mean, this drop is made up of sounds that are... they're related in the fact that they're all bass sounds that I've made and they're mostly all heavily distorted, but they're all kind of different. So when I send them to a bus and I send them through OTT, send them through a wave shaper, I EQ them together, that just kind of creates a cohesive package for me to present in terms of all of the wubs. But of course we're high passing because that's where the sub bass comes in. So we're cutting off the bottom end of all those basses and replacing it with that simple that simple subwoofer, because then we can make sure we have a real solid bass, solid foundation for those basses to live. Even if the basses are phasing in and out or going all crazy, like this, the sub range is still solid and powerful. Okay, here's a. Okay. Ooh, this is a cool. This is another. This is a free synth as well, Rave Generator. I use it all the time. It's amazing. So go check that one out for sure. That's just a dunk dunk. It's being layered with this, but that's just giving it a little more like distortion, I guess. And those are the vocals. So if we add them together, I mean, the song has a lot of tracks, but a lot of them are automation. These are crash cymbals. So these are the synths used in the intro. I like to do that. You know, I like to use parts from the intro in the drops to make it feel like the same song. I find sometimes you'll have like a lot of elements, a lot of great elements in your intro, and then you go to a drop that feels kind of unrelated to the intro. And maybe if you just included a couple of the elements from the intro as a reference, it would feel more like a song to me or something. I don't know. That's just my opinion, but that's why I usually do it. Okay, now we're relying more on the square bass. Also using volume automation to give it more of a chunk. We've introduced a new. I like this sound. I love that sound. I think that was like a percussive sound that I time stretched the shit out of and distorted and all kinds of crazy shit too. I probably spent like 15 minutes just tweaking just the distortion on this. So I probably have like an hour into that sound. But there's so many good parts that I could cut and use in different stuff if I ever just need like a weird little zappy thing. That's why I love doing that stuff. So if you listen to it in the song. And actually, if we skip forward to the end. Quit running your mouth, you better bust it out. That's actually the sound that's at the end of the track. So now the riser, I believe, is, yep, it's still this guy. So this is from the intro. Where's the... So I'm like, I'm building anticipation, I'm rising, but I'm rising rhythmically because if I just had like, it wouldn't have the same effect if I just did this. You know, it almost sounds like the two elements, the riser and the wubs, are not aware of each other when you do that. So what I did with this is I cut up the riser so that we still get that overall feeling that we're going somewhere. We're building anticipation for the next part. But I'm not ignoring the fact that the basses are rhythmic and syncopated and doing a thing. So that's why the riser's cut up. I think a lot of the time, especially with me, because effects can be kind of boring, or doing effects can be kind of monotonous work, you know? And a lot of time I leave it to the end and to do them. But with this one, I think it paid off that I didn't just kind of set it and forget it. Okay, put a riser there, have it rise up to the next part, done, moving on. Like I got a little more creative even with the effects, and that way I enjoyed doing it more and it wasn't quite as annoying. So anyway, okay. So the only thing new here that's not in the intro are maybe these chords, which is another instance of this guy with the Voyager patch, which is just like this really ethereal kind of chord. And we got the Grand Prix code. You may or may not know, I do an ARG with all of my single releases where there's a Grand Prix race. I'll put a description in below, and I'll put a suggestion to the video that it explains it somewhere on the screen right now. I hide it in there. I generated the code. If you look at this one, so what my fans would do when they heard the song is... So that's the code they need. They go and put it into bit.ly, so bit.ly/2RAGGOP. That takes you to the first start, like the first step of the race. And then, anyway, go look at the video and it'll explain it to you. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so second drop. Same idea, just different execution. So we've got, you know, like these kind of initial sounds. Where's the sidechain? And a little more reliant on the robotic death sound that I was talking about before. This is kind of cool. It's a really fast repetition. Okay, so that's basically the song. I mean, there's lots of effects and stuff happening, but nothing that is really crazy. It's mostly EQ, reverb, distortion. If there was any sort of like crazy effect stuff, I would go over that. But it's mostly just mixing stuff. All the creativity in this song happened mostly in the sound design, the musicality of it, and all of the effects that went into these bass sounds when I made them to begin with. So yeah, let's really quickly talk about the mastering. I don't think I did that in the last one, so we could go over kind of the mastering techniques that I use. Mastering, you may or may not know, mastering is kind of, okay, you've got all these elements. They're all mixed, hopefully, properly, loudness-wise, frequency-wise, you know, stereo width and everything. Now they're all going to get summed together, added together into a stereo channel, so just left and right. So the mastering is basically your last step to take all of those sounds, drums, bass, synths, you know, melody, vocals, everything, add them all together. And now what do? Because now maybe you have 4 snares that all hit at the same time. So all those peaks of the start of the snap of the start of the snap of the snare. Wow, am I fucking Eminem? Anyway, they will all add up to a really big peak. So you may have compressed them on their own, but now that you've added them together, you've got something else to deal with. And that is basically where the mastering comes in. So the first step that I do in mastering, and again, this is just my technique. Most of the mastering I do is ozone. I've used ozone since like ozone 4, I believe. Comes in the equalizer. Equalizer is kind of your chance to adjust if a lot of elements are sitting in the same kind of frequency range. Maybe you see I have this dip here. Maybe there was a lot of energy right around 3K. Now, the real proper way, if you're making gigantic changes at this step, you got to go back to the mix. That's my opinion. If you're like pulling a lot, like you can see I'm pulling not even 1 dB. I'm pulling 0.7, and that's the deepest one. If you're pulling, you know, like 2-3 dB in ranges, you should go to the elements that are causing that problem and fix it there. Because what happens is, say you have a guitar and you're singing, and the guitar has way too much 3000 hertz, and you have to pull 2 dB out of it. Well, if you pull 2 dB of 3K out of the master, now all of a sudden your vocals are going to have that big 3K dip in it. Maybe your drums are going to have that 3K dip. You're not able to affect things individually at this level. So you should go back, and if the guitar is the problem, fix it in the guitar. That way you don't have to pull 3K out of everything in the master stage. But typically when it comes to small adjustments, I'm okay with making small adjustments in the master stage with EQ like this, just to solve some problems. I'll typically use a mid-side EQ. So basically it separates the signal into the stuff that's on the sides and the stuff that's down the center. And I'll pull all the low end out of the sides and leave it in the center. And that's just another kind of sub-separation technique. I typically will boost a little bit of high ends in the side, which is almost like a widening tool without messing with the phase too much. It doesn't always need it. There's really no, like, you can't just go and copy these settings that I use and put it on your song and expect it to sound good. It really depends on what you're giving it and what kind of signal it's getting, whether it needs these boosts or cuts or whatever. So the first step is just a gentle EQing. Even this is 1.2 dB boost. You know, that's pretty much as extreme as they typically get for me before I go back and actually fix something in the mixing stage. So let's turn this off. The next step is dynamics. And this is like, this is a multi-band compressor. So what I'm doing is I'm segmenting the track into different regions. So this one is the sub-range. This step allows me to control the dynamics of the track it allows me to control the dynamics of each frequency range, because I don't want something that's going on in the sub bass and kick range to necessarily interact with something that's going on in the snare or the hi-hat range. So this gives me the chance to go in and kind of squish these frequency ranges together before it hits the final stage. So this is just kind of grabbing the peaks of the kick drum mostly, and then moving. This is kind of the low mids. This is kind of the maybe the punch of the kick drum and not the bottom end of the kick drum. Also the snare and a lot of the grungy bass sounds. Not a lot. See, there's not a lot of gain reduction happening. It's really just kind of pulling down those overall peaks to a more manageable level. This is the real snappy part of the snare. A lot of the overtones of the bass and the vocals would fall under this range. And then the top end. Oops. Okay, so this is, like I said, this is controlling each almost elements, you know, like the kick and the sub are in one, and you're controlling the dynamics. And the reason you're doing that is you want to give the mastering limiter the best signal you can to deal with. And if your kick and snare are interacting in a bad way, they might add up, and too much of a peak might hit the master, and it might have to pull the gain way down, and you might hear pumping, you might hear it as overcompressed. But now that I've kind of gotten the overall signal somewhat leveled using this multi-band compressor, we're hitting the master limiter. And this is the last chance before the output, this is the last chance we have to control the dynamics and control the peak. I almost always use this modern, aggressive, like this is the release time. A really fast release time will be more distorted sounding, but these types of tracks can get away with that because they're already distorted anyway. So it's hitting this pretty damn hard. Like that is a lot. That's a lot of gain reduction, right? But it's okay because it doesn't sound bad. So some people would look at that and be like, "Whoa, that's way too much gain reduction. You got to pull that back, or you got to like do. Maybe you need to compress more on a track by track level so that they don't add up as much when they hit the master limiter." But to me, I like the way it sounds, so I don't care. That's what it comes down to. I understand that this is a lot, and if it was causing an issue, I would be able to go and fix those issues because I understand how this stuff works from doing it for so long. So I guess the moral of the story is if you understand the rules, then it makes it a lot easier to break them and not have negative effects. The kind of the general rules of thumb and sort of, I don't know, the things that people say you should or shouldn't do, they're there for a reason. You shouldn't have 10 kick drums all going at the same time because normally they'd all interact with each other and maybe cancel each other out or maybe be really weird. But hey, if you understand that and you want to use 10 kick drums and you find a way of doing it, then that's great. That's just one more way of being creative. So I'm a big fan of like understand the rules and then just break them. Anyway, I think that's basically it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. I love sharing knowledge. I love helping people out who are maybe just starting production. And I don't really hold any of these techniques close to my heart. I'm happy to share it because I'm not afraid of somebody taking my techniques and copying me. Like, I'm me, and you're not going to be me. You're going to be you, I hope. You shouldn't try to be me. You should be you. So let me know if you have any questions. The stems, if you want to mess around with this, the stems to all of my tracks, I always put them on my Discord server. There'll be a link down in the info box so you can hop on the Discord server, grab some stems, play around with the elements, maybe learn some more, because that's the goal. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you enjoy this or enjoy car content, because I love doing car stuff too, make sure to subscribe and fucking ring the bell icon and all the YouTube stuff. All right, peace. You better bust it out.